This unit's going to cover the autonomic nervous system. Now, looking at this chart, you've seen this chart or will see this chart several times as you go through the different sections of the nervous system within the last week and this week. And so here is just a rundown. We have our central nervous system. Remember, that's going to consist of the brain and spinal cord. And then we're going to break down the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, which is going to be all that nervous tissue that's going to be found outside of the brain and spinal cord, or what we refer to as the CNS, or central nervous system. So starting over to the left-hand side, we have the somatic nervous system, the SNS. The somatic nervous system is going to consist of things such as your special senses. Your special senses will be what we cover in the next unit. That will cover things like eyesight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, all of those different things. And so we'll go over those in depth with the next unit of notes. And so with those, they're going to travel using those somatic sensory neurons to the central nervous system, where those messages will be interpreted, and then it will send out a signal which is going to come out through that somatic motor neuron, and that is going to go voluntarily to the skeletal muscle, and that's how they will react. Now, coming over to the center, we have the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. Autonomic sensory receptors and autonomic sensory neurons, remember, are going to pick up, they're going to send information to that central nervous system, and then they're going to come back out through the motor neurons, and these are going to be your involuntary ones. So this is going to be things like it'll come out through the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. It will activate things such as smooth muscle. Remember, that's under involuntary control. It also will activate and control things such as cardiac muscle and the glands. And the last one is going to be referred to as the enteric nervous system, or the ENS. Now with this one, that enteric motor neuron is going to be involuntary, and it's going to be found in the enteric plexuses. It's going to activate things such as smooth muscle. It's going to activate glands. It'll activate things such as endocrine cells of the GI tract. And so what happens is when it comes over to this area, it can also come in from that ANS, and you have your enteric sensory receptors over that you see on the right-hand side that are going to be picking up on things such as neurons in the GI tract and those enteric plexuses there that are picking up on information of things that are coming through that GI tract. It sends it to the central nervous system. It has to make a decision what to do. Then it comes back down through that autonomic nervous system, and it will activate these things. Now with the autonomic nervous system, it's also known as the involuntary nervous system. You're going to have a motor subdivision of the PNS, or peripheral nervous system there. So remember, we just looked at those. This one is one of those three categories, so it's a subdivision. This controls, like we said, the body activities automatically. It's going to have special neurons that regulate cardiac muscles. It's going to help to regulate smooth muscle. That's going to be found in things such as visceral organs, blood vessels. So if those blood vessels need to constrict or dilate, it helps to operate those. And with glands. So it helps to help the glands create and secrete whatever type of substances that they are in charge of producing. Also, it's going to help to maintain homeostasis. This constantly makes adjustments to keep internal conditions stable. So it's constantly monitoring what's going on throughout the body, and it'll send it to the central nervous system, which will determine what that set point is and send out a signal or a response in order to correct it if it needs correcting, if it's too high or too low, whatever it's trying to adjust. This nervous system is going to consist only of motor nerves. So that's going to be very important. So when you have somatic versus autonomic nervous system, both are going to be found in the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. The different effector organs and neurotransmitters is what's going to kind of set them apart. The somatic nervous system is going to have cell bodies in the central nervous system and an axon that's going to extend to the effector organ. The autonomic nervous system is going to have a chain of two motor neurons. So you're going to have what's called a preganglionic axon. That's going to be the first neuron that is going to travel through in that central nervous system. And what that means is before the ganglion. So preganglionic is before the ganglion. And then you'll have the second neuron, which is called the postganglionic axon. And so with this one's going to be outside of the central nervous system, and this one goes directly to the organ. So here's a representation of the somatic nervous system. So it's showing you those upper motor neurons in that primary motor cortex of the brain. And so you see that neuron that's going to travel down and can come out a somatic motor nuclei of the brainstem and connect directly to lower motor neurons to the skeletal muscle, or it can take it from an upper neuron in that primary motor cortex, travel through the brain down to that somatic nuclei of the spinal cord, and go from the spinal cord through motor neurons directly to the skeletal muscle in order to activate them. So here, in contrast, you have that autonomic nervous system, and it's going to utilize ganglia. So how this is going to work is, let's say that we have a message coming out of the brain, and we want to send that through the autonomic nervous system to have some kind of effect on all of these effectors that are out here. So it sent that information down through that motor nuclei in the hypothalamus. It reached the preganglionic neuron, and that goes to that autonomic ganglia. The autonomic ganglia is going to contact and affect those effectors such as smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscle, adipocytes, any tissue that it needs to regulate. And so that is going to be in control of what's coming on down through here. So we have the collection of nerve cells found in tissues in the body called ganglia. And so they're just collections of these nerve cells. The autonomic nervous system is going to use a preganglionic fiber to communicate from the brain to the ganglia and from the spinal cord to the ganglia. And so those ganglia are going to have nerve cells that are going to process that information and then send out extensions. That would be through that postganglionic neuron extension coming out. And it's going to contact that effector. So it could be a cardiac muscle or a gland, and it's going to cause them to have some type of activity. And so in order to do this, they're going to use neurotransmitters to do this. It could be, for example, if it's muscle, it could be acetylcholine, or it could be epinephrine, norepinephrine. Any of those neurotransmitters are going to be used to affect those effector tissues. And so different divisions of the autonomic nervous system are going to use different neurotransmitters in order to affect these effectors or those particular cells. So we're utilizing cranial nerves, and we're using spinal nerves and other kinds of nerves in order to contact the body and in order for it to connect to the brain and spinal cord and be able to process information that it needs to send to it. So in this diagram, we're going to see a comparison of the autonomic and somatic nervous systems. And so with the first one, you have your somatic nervous system. You can see that it has a main single neuron, which is going to be located in the central nervous system. It's going to have the axon that's going to come out and travel through the tissues. You're going to see how it's heavily myelinated. So it's going to be able to send those signals through quickly. And this one, in this case, is going to use the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and it's going to affect those skeletal muscles. So it uses that acetylcholine to activate those skeletal muscles in order to contract. And so it's going to stimulate those muscles using this. Now, the two below are going to be part of the autonomic nervous system. They're going to be divided up into two parts. We have our sympathetic versus our parasympathetic. The easiest way to think of it is as the sympathetic is going to be your fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic is going to be your rest and digest response. So if you're resting, parasympathetic is going to be in control. If you're stressed or in a high stressful situation, that's going to be your fight or flight. Then you're going to be in a parasympathetic situation. So the sympathetic nervous system is going to have short preganglionic nerve fibers and very long postganglionic nerve fibers. They're going to contact things like various tissues in the body, glands, muscle tissues, and even the adrenal medulla. So looking here in this picture, that's going to be the inner part of that adrenal gland there. And so that's going to be stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. And so the hormones that are going to be released here are going to be things such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. And you can see how they're being released from that adrenal medulla into the bloodstream to travel across the body. The parasympathetic nervous system is going to have really, really long preganglionic axons and a really, really short postganglionic axon or fibers. They usually exclusively use acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter of choice. So you'll see that there at the ganglion. And so these chemicals can be stimulatory or inhibitory, dependent on the effector organ that it's going to and that's trying to contact. And so that's what you see, the plus or the minus there beside of it. So top one, for that somatic nervous system, it's stimulatory using acetylcholine. The ones for the autonomic nervous system at the bottom two, they could be a stimulatory or an inhibitory effect, and it'll be things you can use acetylcholine, or you can use epinephrine, norepinephrine, noradrenaline, things like that. And so here for note's sake, getting into those two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, like we said, was your sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. They regulate the same organs, but with opposite effects to counterbalance one another. So we saw the sympathetic division, that is your fight or flight, that mobilizes the body during extreme situations. This is when you need to be able to take care of yourself. So it will cut off things such as oxygenated blood going to things like the stomach and parts of the body that do not need to work at that time. So if you're in the middle of a life or death situation, you don't need to really worry about digesting your food. The parasympathetic division is the rest and digest stage. This is where you unwind, you conserve. This is usually what you spend most of your day in, or should be spending most of your day in that parasympathetic division, and not under stress. So the anatomy of the parasympathetic division, it originates from the brain nuclei and cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. And it goes through S2 through S4. So those are your sacral nerves. This is also going to be known as your craniosacral division, since it goes through the cranial and sacral area. The cranial nerve synapse with ganglionic motor neurons and terminal ganglia basically are going to be at the effector organs. The sacral preganglionic neurons from the pelvic splenic nerves, which are going to be your pelvic nerves, and they go through the pelvic cavity. These always use acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter. So in this diagram, it's showing that sympathetic nervous system. This shows the thoracolumbar division. So it goes out through those thoracic nerves, comes out through those lumbar nerves, and even shows the sacral nerves towards the bottom, the S nerves. From there, it shows how they are connected through their splenic nerve, through the upper, superior, lesser, things like that, and how they go directly on and connect in with the different organs that they're going to stimulate or inhibit. Right. With the sympathetic division, we've said this over and over, it carries out the fight or flight response. So this decreases digestive and urinary functions because you don't need to be worrying about these things if you're in an extremely stressful situation that's life or death. It heightens your mental alertness because one thing that you do need to be able to do is to think clearly. So you do need that oxygenated and nutrient-rich blood going to the cells of the brain in order to help you think clearly. It increases metabolic rate, and that's going to be important in the muscles in order to get you to safety or in order to help protect you. It activates energy sources, so it's going to be able to break this energy down quickly in a usable form for those muscles. It increases respiratory rate and dilates respiratory passages because in order for your metabolism to increase, in order to be able to use a lot of energy, that's going to require oxygen. So cellular respiration is going to be that process, and oxygen is required. So breathing increases and the dilation of your respiratory passages will increase in order to bring in more oxygen. You're also going to have an increase in heart rate and blood pressure because we're going to need to get the blood that's oxygenated and nutrient rich into places that really need it, like the brain, like the muscles. So the heart's the pump, it's going to get it there, so it increases, and then the pressure as it goes through these vessels is going to increase. And it's also going to activate these sweat glands. So you might notice, for example, when you get up in front of somebody to speak, you might find that to be a very stressful situation. Your sweat glands may become activated because you are put into the sympathetic nervous system response, and you would notice that. And so looking here, you can see how these different glands are actually going to connect into these different organs. So note that you have short preganglionic fibers, and then note that you're going to have long postganglionic fibers here for that sympathetic nervous system. So the anatomy of that sympathetic nervous system, it's going to originate from gray matter that's found in the spinal cord from T1 through L2. So it goes all down through T1 through T12, and then L1 and L2. So it's going to cover all of those. That's also known as the thoracolumbar division. Ganglia are going to be at the sympathetic trunk. That's going to be found near the spinal cord. So you're going to have a short preganglionic neuron and long preganglionic neuron that's going to transmit impulses from that central nervous system to the effector, whichever organ that may be, going back looking at this picture. The norepinephrine and epinephrine are going to be those neurotransmitters that's going to be used in order to activate these effector organs. And so looking here, you can see in the diagram that you're going to have your spinal cord in the center. You have that preganglionic neuron that is going to be that section in the gray matter of the spinal cord. It is going to come out of the spinal cord and travel through into the sympathetic nerve or postganglionic fibers that you see there. So that's going to innervate visceral organs in that thoracic cavity by sympathetic nerves. Now coming over to the left-hand side, you have that autonomic ganglion of the right sympathetic chain, and it's going to be in that section there. So you see the gray matter, it's still that preganglionic neuron. It's going to come out of that area. It innervates the visceral effectors by the spinal cord. Notice how it wraps around through that white ramus communicants, and it can go up towards the autonomic ganglion of the right sympathetic chain and go out, or it can go out where it came around that white ramus. So both of those are going to innervate the visceral effectors by spinal nerves. And this is looking at it as a cadaver. So you can go in and you can look at those different spinal nerves. You see the aorta there, you see the vena cava, and you see those spinal nerves and the spinal cord, which is going to be 15. So here we see the collateral ganglia. Here we're going to use the spinal nerves. So you've got your information coming in. You see that lateral horn portion of the gray matter in that spinal cord. It's going to come out that ventral area. It's going to go towards that white ramus. So that's where it's going to go through that sympathetic ganglion. And then it's going to go all the way using a spinal nerve, a sympathetic nerve, to the collateral ganglion. And from there, that collateral ganglion is going to be a collection of nerves inside the core of your body. And so from there, that collateral ganglion, it's then going to go to an effector organ. And so that's going to come out at that postganglionic fiber. So let's look at it again. We're coming out, we're going through that white ramus. It's going to come out using the sympathetic nerves, and then it's going to go to that collateral ganglion. There, it's going to have a synapse where it's going to come together with that postganglionic fiber and go out to an effector organ. Here we have the adrenal medulla. It's going to be a unique situation here. You can see here that you have your preganglionic fiber going out. It goes to the collateral ganglion that you see in the center, that circle in the center, and then it goes to the adrenal medulla, which is going to be in the center portion of that adrenal gland. This is going to be part of that sympathetic nervous system. It's going to be part of a sympathetic organ for that sympathetic nervous system. So this adrenal gland basically is going to release different types of hormones. It'll secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are going to be neurotransmitters that are secreted into circulation. They then become hormones, and they're going to go to target organs to have their effect on them. So this is going to be how that sympathetic nervous system utilizes the adrenal medulla. Sometimes the sympathetic nervous system is going to use viscosities. These are going to look like strings of pearls. Here you'll see a highly myelinated preganglionic fiber. It's going to go to that ganglion. From that ganglion, it's going to go to the ganglion neuron, where then it's going to travel down that postganglionic fiber, which, if you notice, is going to be unmyelinated. So you'll notice that postganglionic fiber, which is unmyelinated, goes down and extends into this tissue. In this case, you're going to see it's a smooth muscle tissue. And with smooth muscle tissue, it's not going to work exactly like skeletal muscle tissue. So you're going to want to be able to drop neurotransmitters off into large areas around the smooth muscle tissue. That's going to help it have the signal to be able to contract or relax. Most of the time, it's going to be a contraction, but sometimes it might be relaxing, like in blood vessels. So you see these little swellings that are going to be full of neurotransmitters. And so they contain these neurotransmitters that are going to be then released and into this area. So that way it can drop off and release a lot of the neurotransmitter to the area, so it's able to basically contract or relax. So let's talk about adrenergic versus cholinergic receptors. So when you drop off norepinephrine or epinephrine or acetylcholine, there's going to be receptors which we consider to be adrenergic or cholinergic. Adrenergic are going to be receptors that are going to respond to norepinephrine and epinephrine. So NE is going to be your norepinephrine, E is epinephrine. And so this is going to, depending upon the type of adrenergic receptor, it will stimulate, let's say, alpha receptors for norepinephrine, or it could stimulate both alpha and beta receptors if it's epinephrine. And there's going to be a chart down here that you can see which ones that it stimulates. So you'll see both the alpha 1, 2, and the beta 1 and 2 down at the bottom and what they stimulate in their responses. Cholinergic, these cell receptors are going to respond to acetylcholine. And so if you look down at the bottom, you can see both the adrenergic receptors and you can see the cholinergic receptors. So looking at this chart, even though you might be using, let's say, the same neurotransmitter, these neurotransmitters, depending on the adrenergic receptor, is going to have a different response and different mechanisms that it will activate and that will occur. And that's pretty cool because you're using the same neurotransmitter, but it's able to do different things. So this chart or this picture here is just showing you a comparison of sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. So you see the preganglionic fiber in the sympathetic nervous system is going to be shorter. In the parasympathetic system, it is going to be much longer. And so you can, with the sympathetic nervous system, you can see here it's going to use acetylcholine, but for the synapses after that, it's going to use norepinephrine and epinephrine. Parasympathetic nervous systems always use nothing but acetylcholine. And so it's going to be nicotinic or muscarinic. And so it's always going to use acetylcholine there. Now, let's talk about the parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to carry out your rest and digest. It's going to decrease metabolic rate, so it slows everything down as far as how quickly it needs to produce energy. This is going to be your daily activity. This should be what you're in at all times, or most of the time when you're relaxed and just watching TV, doing the dishes, reading a book, doing your homework. So the heart decreases its rate, blood pressure also decreases. It's going to increase salivation and release of digestive juices. So it's able to break down and digest the food in your stomach. It's going to increase digestive motility and blood flow to the digestive organs. It's going to help to stimulate urination and defecation. So these are processes that you would want to be able to do during the parasympathetic state. So looking here at this diagram, you'll notice that the parasympathetic nervous system is mainly going to use cranial nerves in order to control the different organs here. You see cranial nerve 3, cranial nerve number 7, cranial nerve number 9, and number 10. Notice number 10 is going to be the majority of controlling a lot of your different organs. So that vagus nerve is going to control and extend out to control most of your major organs. Now, looking towards the bottom, you can see that it's going to use some the lower regions of the body are going to use the sacral nerves that are coming out. So you see these pelvic nerves coming out of that sacral region of the spinal cord, and that's going to be used to control things such as the uterus, the ovaries, the penis and scrotum, or urinary bladder, and can go in and help to control things also like the kidneys, and even go in and control portions of the rectum. So you do want to realize there's a difference between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems in terms of the length. We really focus on the length of fibers. So preganglionic fibers are going to be short in the sympathetic nervous system and relatively long in the parasympathetic nervous system. If you're looking at the neurotransmitters being released for the sympathetic, it's going to be acetylcholine, where over here at the parasympathetic, you're going to see that it's also acetylcholine. Once you get to the postganglionic fibers, the length of these in the sympathetic nervous system are going to be relatively long, and the neurotransmitter that is released is going to be norepinephrine, or it could be sometimes acetylcholine or nitrous oxide. If you're coming over to the parasympathetic division, relatively these fibers are going to be short in length, and they're mainly going to use acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter. Now, neuromuscular or neuroglandular junctions, if it's the sympathetic nervous system, you're going to have varicosities and enlarged axonic terminals that are going to release transmitters near the target cells. Now, if it's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, you're going to have junctions that release transmitters to special receptor surfaces there. So it doesn't actually go in and release at the target cell itself. Now, the degree of divergence from the central nervous system to the ganglion division is going to be 1 to 32 for the sympathetic division versus the parasympathetic division. It's usually a 1 to 6 ratio. And so general function with the sympathetic nervous system, it stimulates metabolism, increases your alertness, prepares for emergency, and is known as your fight or flight response. So this has high awareness. With the parasympathetic nervous system, the general function is to promote relaxation, nutrient uptake, energy storage, and is considered your rest and digest. Now, sympathetic function, like we said, fight or flight, your response to unusual stimulus. It might be something that scared you, that frightened you. It could be something that you're nervous about that could cause it. So it takes over to increase activities. Remember, as the E division: exercise, excitement, emergency, and even embarrassment. Homeostatic imbalance. It has excessive sympathetic nervous system stimulation. This could be somebody who's known as having like a type A personality. They're always on high alert, always want things to go a specific way. They never slow down, and they may be susceptible to more types of heart disease. These people are the type of people who have high blood pressure. They tend to be the ones who develop ulcers. The parasympathetic functioning, or the housekeeping activities, are going to help to conserve energy. This, of course, is your rest and digest, which we've mentioned over and over in this unit. This helps to maintain daily necessary bodily functions. Remember, as the D division: digestion, defecation, and diuresis. Okay, that's going to finish us up for your autonomic nervous system unit. I'll see you back here next time for our last unit for Biology 141, and that is going to be special senses.